When I left the theater after seeing Thunderbolts last night, one of the theater employees came up to me and asked what I thought about the movie. And I responded with this super convoluted, I liked it. The hype, and it was the most inarticulate thing I've ever said about a Marvel movie, to be completely honest. What I was really trying to tell him was that I liked it, but that I had so much hype going in that I wasn't quite sure if certain moments were actually not living up to the hype or if they just weren't that great. By hype, I mean hype. Like, I went into Thunderbolts last night so incredibly excited. Possibly more excited than I've been for a Marvel movie in a few years. Not because I don't love Marvel, as we all know, but this one just felt like something special was going on. When we were standing in line buying popcorn, I was borderline jumping up and down. I was the embodiment of the phrase giggling and kicking my feet. Leading into the movie, I've been talking about how something feels different in the Marvel fan base atmosphere with a couple different things going on. Marvel Rivals, Daredevil Born Again, coming off the hype of that show. Something in the air just felt different. And with the timing and release of this movie being very similar to the 13 years ago release of Marvel's Avengers and the coming up on 10-year anniversary, almost to the day, of Age of Ultron, it just felt special. It also was our first team-up movie beyond just like a duo or a cameo since Avengers Endgame, I think, if I'm thinking about this properly. I guess Guardians of the Galaxy. Basically, it felt exciting and different, and I was so ready for this movie to be amazing. And when it started, it starts with a bang. There's some really great stuff going on. Florence Pugh is definitely placed at the center of this film as Yelena, which we'll get into in a little bit. She's great. It's wonderful. I was excited. But when the first couple pacing bumps started and the movie felt slow or a little bit like, what's happening? Are we just going to be in this location or with these people the entire movie? It felt a little wonky is the best word I can describe, because it didn't feel bad and I was still laughing and I was still enjoying myself and the score was certainly really great, but something wasn't clicking the way that I wanted it to. I was so happy to see so many familiar faces on screen, at least until I realized that they weren't really doing more with those familiar faces than wanting you to go, oh look, Ghost! I don't need my Marvel movies to remind me every 5 minutes when the last time I saw someone was or what their background and history is. I mean, in fact, I actually don't want them to do that, to the point where when you are saying like, oh, look, it's our buddy from the show on Disney Plus, it just feels dumb. And so in this film, since everybody is supposed to be a familiar face, I expect you to trust me enough to know where this stuff is. But in turn, I also expect you to actually develop the characters. Like, if I know that his name is John Walker and I know that he legitimately was Captain America for a period of time in the Falcon and Winter Soldier, I do want to know more about him, because beyond Yelena and our new friend Bob, who I'm not going to go into because I don't want to get into spoilers, we don't really explore more of these characters. Like, I feel like I know the exact same amount about Ghost that I did when I finished watching Ant-Man and the Wasp prior to Avengers Endgame coming out. And John Walker's life, I guess, I found a few new things out, but to be honest, they weren't things that felt unexpected about his character or really new, like I could have probably theorized. And so I just didn't feel like I got anything out of seeing these characters again, beyond that simple recognition. But because the characters have never met, we're playing the introduction game more than we really need to for this film being based on familiar faces, if that makes sense. We do get that interconnected MCU, and we get the characters that I'm going to root for because I do know them from something else and I do like and care about them. All the actors are great, and a lot of their comedic chemistry really works in this film. After the 2-hour runtime of this film, I don't really feel like I'm rooting for them any more than I was at the beginning of this movie. In fact, the only person I really care about more after this movie is Yelena, and I already cared about her the most going into this film. It honestly made me think about how good Avengers does at introducing us to 3 basically brand new team members and developing the 3 existing characters that had their solo films through their relationships with one another. And I think that's the biggest missed opportunity that this film had. You had the opportunity to really create team dynamics, to really develop relationships between these characters. And instead, it kind of feels like the characters are playing catch up with what we as the audience already know, which isn't necessarily the worst thing this movie could have done, but it didn't feel like it capitalized on the opportunity it had at hand. So if the film isn't necessarily focused on developing these characters, what is it focused on? And I would say ambition. This film is one of the more ambitious Marvel projects that we've seen in a while, and you're going to be like, well, we had the Deadpool MCU movie, and we literally just had a movie where Harrison Ford plays the president and Red Hulk, so like, follow me here, but the plot of this movie is honestly really interesting, and it has a couple of new things that it introduces that I think could really build in the future. And I like the fact that they weren't the central focus of the movie, like being like, this is important, you need to know this, but I do think some of this stuff is going to pop up in the future. And again, I'm trying to avoid some of this because of spoilers, but this film has this level of wonkiness, I keep using this word, but this abstractness that kind of connects it to, in my head, Doctor Strange, with a few things that just feel really out of this world, despite the film being otherwise grounded, with the characters being like, so we all just shoot and punch, that's all of our powers, that's all of us do, great, cool. But additionally, it felt to me like it was harkening back to Age of Ultron. If you remember in Age of Ultron, all of the characters, because of Wanda and Ultron kind of getting in these characters' heads, they have these kind of trauma flashbacks and or nightmares that are reminding them of things of their past. Here, we kind of get that element at play, which I really liked because, again, like I said, it delivered on what I wanted, was this film to harken back to those prior Avenger films, but it wasn't done in exactly the same way. And so I really appreciated that. So story-wise, this film does have a stronger, more solid, and cohesive plot than I think Brave New World does, where Brave New World kind of feels like we're going from scene to scene and location to location at times. Despite the fact that I did really like that film, and I'm not going back on that, this one just felt a little bit more character driven and a little bit more like, oh, we're gonna toy with a couple of strings in the background. Because to be honest, we're not at the building blocks of the MCU, but we kind of need some new building blocks, and I do think this film provides that in a couple of different ways that maybe I'll get into in a spoiler discussion later. This missed opportunity of developing these characters kind of just put a tainted taste in my mouth. Didn't quite sour the movie for me. In fact, I'm pretty excited to see it again, but it certainly added a little too much salt to where I kind of need a second viewing to really process my thoughts on this one. And I do think it will grow on me. I do think it will, because there'll probably be elements that, now that I know what to expect going into this movie, I will be more excited to witness a second time, and or little clues to pick up on, because this film does feel like it had those. What I'm really excited to see when I see this movie again this weekend is to focus on those few moments that had a certain spark about them. There are a few moments at this film of choreography, a line here or there between characters, or some sort of reference that made me feel like the people behind this film, whether they be the director, the actors, the screenwriters, whoever it was, really had a love for what the early MCU was. And I won't tell you what those things are, but if you know, you know. You'll see them, you'll pick up on them, and it'll make you probably feel in your heart and your gut a little bit of the way that I did. These tiny, tiny moments harken back to team-ups of the past, how characters found a bond, how the Avengers were formed. It made my heart swell at times, and they were in the smallest of moments. So I know that I'm saying like there were pacing issues here, and there were a few times where I didn't quite live up to what I wanted this movie to be, but these small moments had everything right at their core. And that made this movie worth taking a second look at, worth making, in my opinion. They focus on moments that build toward something like Avengers Endgame, because you can't just get there without the building blocks. Avengers Endgame isn't important if you don't have all of the little stepping stones, all of the smaller moments. It's not just about the end of a specific film or an enemy defeat or a specific cameo. This story is about building a team and finding a reason to fight another day, to try to make the world a better place. That's at its core what the Avengers has always been about. So for every moment in this movie that is missing, just lacking, just shy of that special S-tier ranking movie sauce, it has the perfect core ingredient that just makes you feel like there's something still worth fighting for, both for these characters, in this movie, and in the MCU itself. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. Please subscribe if you're excited for more Marvel content, because a lot more will be coming. Have a wonderful day, and I will see y'all in my very next video. Bye, y'all.